Hello, this month for the Fly of the Month we want to discuss the construction of a yarn strike indicator like this one. This particular one is done in black and white. Sometimes the contrasting yarns are very useful, and it also happened to be just one of the very clean ones I had laying around. I'm using black materials for this demonstration because I think they'll show up better on the webcam video. So before we discuss the actual construction, let's talk about the materials and the tools. The main material obviously is the yarn itself. This is called 6mm braided polypropylene yarn, and you'll see it's a multi-strand material. There's about 20 strands in here, and of course we'll need to separate and comb these strands for the construction. This material is readily available. You can find it on the internet. Sometimes it's called macrame yarn. Comes in all colors. Probably the most popular colors for strike indicators are black, white, yellow, and maybe glow in the dark for a nighttime nymphing. So that's the yarn. The next material are the O-rings, which we use for the construction of the indicator. And here I'm using O-rings of two different sizes. A number 6 size, which is a 7/16 outer diameter, and a number 36 size, which is a 5/16 outer diameter. Naturally, the larger one is used for the attachment to the leader or the tippet. The smaller one is actually used to gather the yarn together for the construction. There's alternate methods of doing this. You can actually whip finish some line around the indicator, but for this case we're just going to do it with O-rings. In terms of tools, it's really pretty simple. You need a very good pair of scissors. Here I'm just using my the same hair scissors I would use for like cutting deer hair. This is a serrated scissor. That's a useful feature. You need a forceps for gathering the material and inserting it into the O-ring. This is actually the same forceps I use stream side. It's a very good tool. And finally, you need a comb. And there's a few different ways you could do this. I've had the best success using a comb like this. You can buy this at any hardware store. It's very pointy, very stout bristles on here. And what you'll find is these points will help you get through the poly yarns, which can be sometimes a little bit tough. So those are the materials. Let's talk about the construction. Okay, let's actually go ahead and talk about the construction of the indicator. You're going to need to cut a piece of your yarn. I usually just overlap it and sort of eyeball it. And go ahead and cut that. Scissor. Then you actually need to go ahead and start separating this thing into strands, because it'll just be impossible to comb as one unit. So to do that, you just grab the whole thing. Usually the first couple are a little bit tricky to get out, and you just start pulling the strands out. Make a little pile on your counter or your work table, and make sure you're getting it down to the individual strands. When you're done doing that, you'll end up with a mass of strands about this size right here. This I prepared before, and when you're at this stage you can actually start combing. You could actually insert one of the O-rings here now if you want, but I found it easier just to start combing. So to start combing, I sort of gather the material as one bunch like this, and just rather gently start combing towards the edge of the indicator first. And you have to work at this a little bit. If you encounter a really, really big snag on the yarn, you're really better off just nipping that little bit off with your scissor. I think you'll be better off in the long run. So start combing on one side. Then, of course, you're going to want to flip the bunch over. Start combing on the other side. And, there's really no critical dimensions or even critical methods here. The idea is just to try to get a very uniform bunch of yarn that you can gather for your indicator. Okay, so after we've combed this material for a while, it gets very easy to pass the comb through here, and you end up with a very uniform bunch. At this stage, we're actually ready to start doing some assembly. First thing we want to do is to encircle this material with the larger O-ring that will actually be attached to our tippet or our leader material. To do that, take the larger O-ring and put it around your forceps like this in such a way that you can still open and close the forceps. grab the bunch of combed out yarn material on one end, so you're left with a short end and a longer end. This will just make it easier to separate the two bunches. Then go ahead and grab your O-ring and just bring it over the top of the material while you're pinching the tool shut. So you're left with something like this, and just slide that down until you've been able to free all of the shorter fibers. So at this stage you've put the O-ring on that's actually going to connect to your line, and you can just sort of fold this material over, and it's starting to look like a strike indicator. The next stage is to put the smaller O-ring around this bunch to gather the material. So again, I've put the smaller O-ring on my forceps, and I'm going ahead and I'm just going to grab the larger O-ring with the forceps, so it looks like this, and then take the smaller O-ring and slide it over the larger bunch. Okay, and you just have to sort of grab this and work it down a little bit. And when you do, you'll be left with something like this, where you've gathered all of the material. So at this stage we've gathered the material, we've assembled with our two O-rings, and it's really looking like an indicator. In fact, it might even be serviceable this way. But at this stage it's nice to sort of blend everything together with a little bit more combing. So now when you're combing both bunches simultaneously, and you're sort of blending all the material together into one large fan-shaped bunch of yarn. And you could see like how large this actually fans out. And you could comb this for as long or as little as you want, but the more the better, I would say. So at this stage you're left with a very large indicator. And it's at the point now where you want to trim this with a scissor. I typically trim this, I would say, about maybe an inch and a quarter high, this dimension here. And when I trim it with my scissor, I try to trim it in sort of a circular motion on top of the indicator. So we're going to do that now. We're going to trim, and I'm trimming in sort of a semicircle around the top. So now I'm left with an indicator, sort of like this. You could comb it out some more if you like. We could have even made this larger if we wanted to. This came out maybe a little bit small. But at this point, this is ready to fish after treating it with your favorite floatant. You can use one of the paste floatants that's very popular. You can also just take a little bit of liquid floatant, like a gink material, put it on your hand and just actually rub the indicator like this, making sure that you pick a lot of the material up in the indicator. So, hope that was helpful. Here's a couple of indicators, and good fishing.